welcome to another video. So today's video is a bit of a shift from where my channel's been heading so far. I think that over the past several months of creating videos and really trying to define and explore what this channel is to be about, I think that my interest is really leaning towards talking, as you've seen before, talking about things that I enjoy: cigars, whiskey, wine, traveling. But I think I want to dive a little bit deeper in this channel and explore really, especially now I'm in my 50s. I'm reaching a stage in life where I think that I want to start exploring a little bit more things that really drive me and interest me. But to share and talk about the challenges of hitting the 50s, what it means for me individually, finding my place in the world. That's something I figured that we should have figured out in our 20s and 30s, but clearly not. And I still really believe and feel that I'm on a journey. I'm still really figuring out who I am. And I think that that puts into context a lot of what I'm doing on this channel. And I'm really happy that you're here on this journey with me. As much as it's a YouTube channel, it's also a diary. It's also a story of what I do on a daily basis, what my life is. And so today, there'll be some more videos where I talk about what I do to make a living, how I work, where I live. Today's video is the first in that, I guess, this shift into where this channel's heading, or what this channel's to be about. So this channel too is a journey. So there will be some changes. You'll notice that there's been a little bit of a shift from my very early content, where I was creating just some I was creating videos on, cigar lounges of the world, which is a great, subject for me to explore. But I'm adding my own personal touch to it, where I'm obviously now in front of the camera. But today's video is a little bit, is going to be a little bit of a deeper dive into where I'm from, and to kind of preface the story of this journey that I find myself on today. And as you saw from the title, it's how I survived the British boarding school. Now, I'll start by saying that I didn't go through a typical boarding school experience. Boarding school in my case wasn't a boarding school you see, in old movies, where the young boys are wearing uniforms and having midnight feasts and adventures and that type of thing. It was a bit of I had a bit of a rough go. I had a bit of a rough go of it. So when I was 10 years old in primary school, I had a lot of family challenges, and the school I was at was an incredibly snobby school. It was miserable. Obviously, I came from a certain part of London where we spoke differently. Our accents weren't, there was no received pronunciation. There was no, there was a lot of slang. So I'm from the southeast of London, and I was picked on brutally at that school by students and by teachers. They treated me and my sister very differently. So, and my family background wasn't the best. So that came out in how I behaved. My parents were split up. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that a lot of people hadn't gone through. So there was a discussion between my mother and the school and the education authority, and it was decided I should be sent to a boarding school. And again, it wasn't a typical boarding school. It was a bit of an experiment. It was a boarding school of what was then called the Inner London Education Authority. So it was a state school. It was um, not in the English sense, where public actually means private, but in the conventional sense, it was a public school. It was called a comprehensive school. So it was primarily for boys from inner city London. A lot of them that had behavioral problems, family problems. There were a number two who were sons of British servicemen serving overseas. So at 11 years old, I was when I finished primary school, I was loaded up onto a bus with, I don't know, I think there must have been around 20 other boys on this bus, with a suitcase, and loaded up onto a bus, and we took about an hour, 2 hour drive outside of London to a city called Ipswich. And just nearby Ipswich was a former stately home, a former estate of a very wealthy family. Um, and the main house of their estate was converted into a boarding school, and around it were built boarding houses, more modern structures. So a beautiful Wolverston Hall, architecturally, was absolutely just stunning. The grounds. It used to be a grammar school, so it was more on the private side, more where the focus was on academics. And prior to that, it had been a naval training base for Navy cadets during the Second World War. Then it became a grammar boarding school. Then it became a comprehensive boarding school, which is when I went to it. And I was assigned to a house that was of 60 boys, that was about a mile and a half from the main school. A former It was a former country home turned into, and at one time it was a convent. Then later on, it became a boarding house, part of Wolverston Hall boarding school. My first arriving was a complete shock. I'd lived a fairly sheltered life, um, and all of a sudden, here I was, 11 years old, thrown into this just seeming anarchy, um, where the older boys ran the boarding house. Um, I wasn't homesick. I didn't suffer feelings of homesickness. I didn't miss my family life, but it was a shock, an absolute shock. I mean, there were kids there that they had issues. They had a lot of issues. And so all of us were thrown into this. So there were 10 of us who started in that particular boarding house. So that year, 60 new boys started throughout the entire school. And we were assigned in groups of 10 to the 6 boarding houses. And as my first dormitory, there were 20 of us in this dormitory and bunk beds, and we were assigned one locker. And very regimented, incredibly regimented. Obviously, we had to get up at a certain time, walk a mile and a half to the main school for breakfast. Then there were the usual lessons. The British education system is very different than the North American education system, insofar as that we studied a subject every day for the entire first 5 years. So we had maths every day, English language, English literature, geography, history every day for 5 years. And we had school on Saturdays. There was a lot of organized sports. So in the summertime, we played cricket. In the winter, we played rugby. So they tried to carry on a lot of the traditions from when it was a more standard, or more when it was a grammar school, boarding school. And I didn't enjoy it. I did. The first 2 years for me were incredibly, incredibly difficult. Um, and again, it wasn't because of being away from home. It was just the insanity of this place. Um, One thing that was very hard to get used to was the corporal punishment. So this was in the 80s, which now doesn't seem that long ago, but there was a lot of corporal punishment. In fact, there was a lot of punishments of all kind for small infractions, big infractions, performing poorly academically. There was punishments galore. Um, if you messed around, what's the expression? F around and find out. Yeah, well, we found out. We found out a lot. Um, I was caned. I was slippered. And when I say slippered, it wasn't a nice fluffy slipper. It was a gym shoe that was kept in a filing cabinet. And you were bent over a desk and you were just beaten with this shoe. I was caned a couple of times, not as much as slippered. Caning stung like hell. It was, as you could imagine, it was a bamboo cane. And you got 6 lashes of that. That wasn't fun, needless to say. So there was a lot of corporal punishment and a lot of just inane punishments. I mean, if you were messing around after lights out at night, you could be brought out into the hallway and told to stand in a corner and face the corner, and it could be for 3 hours. It was just mind-numbing. And if we had a choice, we would have opted to get slippered. It was done within a few seconds. The older boys ran the boarding house. In the boarding house, there was a housemaster, an assistant housemaster, and a house matron. But the housemaster was the teacher that lived on site. He lived in the house, and he was in charge, enforcing all of the rules. The housemaster I had he was very Puritan. Wasn't much into letting young boys express themselves, do much of anything, in fact. Very, very... He did belong to a certain religious sect. I shouldn't say sect. That sounds like a cult. He had very specific religious views, and which prevented us from doing things such as joining. There was a local chapter of the Army Cadets. We weren't allowed to join the Army Cadets because of his religious views. He wasn't a bad guy. He really wasn't, but he was the one who dealt out the corporal punishments. In fact, every teacher could dish out corporal punishments, and you got to learn very quickly which ones were very easy. I shouldn't say easygoing, but the staff who were very prone to giving corporal punishment, and there were some who didn't, you could tell they just didn't agree with it. They objected to it. So life was very regimented, up very early in the morning, the walk to the school, breakfast, lessons all day long. Then at the end of the day, back to the boarding house where we had homework sessions that we had to do. There might have been organized activities, such as I took up fencing. I fenced for 5 years. And I mean, academically, it was fairly rigorous. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't really apply myself. So at that stage in my academic career, I didn't really fare too well. But it was the older boys who ran the boarding house, and some of these guys, and the best way to explain it, some of these guys were absolutely psychotic. They found it fun to storm into our dormitory when we're 11, 12 years old, drag us out, beat us up, trash our dormitory, just inflict absolute hell on us, and that happened fairly frequently. Very soon, you could tell that there was a bit of a shift where... Sorry, cigar keeps going out. There was a bit of a shift, I would say around 83, 84, where the school seemed to be accepting a lot more kids that came from very, very challenging backgrounds. Some of these kids should not have been there. They should have been in very structured environments, for lack of a better term. And very soon, looking in hindsight now, very soon the staff started to lose control, where there was absolute chaos in the school, resulting in an audit was performed by government inspectors that confirmed, or at least highlighted, what the reality of what we were living on a daily basis. It got to the point where there were attacks on staff. There were some pretty bad beatings of the boys, and eventually the school was shut down. It wasn't a great environment. It had the potential of being a great environment, but it wasn't a great environment. And in the end, the school was shut down. So I didn't do too well there. I think as much as there was complete almost lawlessness. Well, because I think of the fact that after a while, the corporal punishment didn't have any effect. The inane punishments didn't have any effect. And I found that I was almost embracing the anarchy. And so I really stopped paying attention to lessons. I started what we call bunking off from class. I skipped a lot of lessons, got into a lot of trouble. And eventually, there was more and more of the punishments, more and more of the corporal punishment. That slowed down a lot when I think when I was around 15. But we got involved in all the usual stuff that I don't know if young boys generally do: smoking, drinking. Those were the days when it was easy at 15 to walk into an off license, a liquor store, and buy booze. There was a lot of stealing going on. It wasn't a healthy environment whatsoever for a young boy to grow up in. That being said, it taught me, I think, some very, very valuable lessons. I learned about consequences very early on. I learned really what it was I wanted from my life. That, I think I had an epiphany. I had a gradual realization, I don't know which, that wasn't the life I really wanted to live. I was incredibly, incredibly angry. And for a long time afterwards, I was very angry in all of my interactions. When I eventually, and this will be another video, when I then had the opportunity to live in Hong Kong. When I arrived there, I was incredibly angry. I didn't realize how angry I was and what this place had done to me until a couple of years ago. I spoke to one of my teachers in Hong Kong where I finished school. I was having a chat with her online, and she said I was one of the angriest young boys that she had met. But I think really I was just a product of the environment I'd spent the last 5 years in. So yeah, I learned consequences. I learned what it was at that time, what I wanted from my life. I did make some friends. I did make some good friends at the time. I didn't really stay in touch with many of them afterwards. But some guys, despite everything, and I like to count myself as one, that we were able to, despite our earlier upbringing, despite the 5 years we'd spent there, some guys were there even longer. Some spent 7 years. One guy I knew, in fact, was sent to boarding school at the age of 5 to 11. Then at 11 years old, he transitioned to this school. So he spent almost 10 years, up until the age of 15, in a boarding school. So despite I think the challenges collectively we faced, some guys did really well. I won't mention his name. There is a very, very famous British rugby player that I was friends with, who was a great guy at the school. Went on to have an incredibly successful year in rugby league. A guy who was in my boarding house at the time, just retired as a general in the British Army. A number of guys, including myself, we did serve in the army. I'm not sure if it's because we were attracted to the regimented life, where there was order. And I think that's something that we all craved. uh, myself, definitely, I craved that sense of order afterwards. I had trouble adapting to it, but I think I really craved it. It taught me that I was able to be self-sufficient. As much as, that has its downsides too. I felt like I didn't need my family. I didn't need a family around me, and that's impacted me to this day, where I don't have that same. I mean, I love my family dearly. I truly do, and I love spending time with them. But it was easy for me, relatively easy for me, to leave the UK when I did, and move here to Canada and not see my family for a long, a number of years at a stretch, because I was used to doing it. So there were some good aspects or some good lessons I learned. There was definitely a lot of. I don't like using the word trauma. I think that's thrown around way too much. I need to think of something else. Um, there were some long-lasting effects, not overly positive, of my time in this boarding school. Despite the fact that I didn't pay attention well, despite the fact I didn't do well academically, a lot of the lessons stuck. And I think that was the origin, or the start, the genesis of my love for learning. There were a couple of teachers there who had, later on I realized, had a massive impact on me. One was an English teacher, very old school, um, who I think he had been there when it was a grammar school, and he was navigating this new, what the school had become, and he did his best for these young poor kids from London to try to give them the value and the benefits of the grammar school system. There was another teacher, he was a geography teacher, in fact, who was an ex-major in the British Army, looked like an ex-major from the British Army, um, treated us like young men, expected that we act like men, even at 11, 12 years old. Um, and just his way of being, um, it left a mark on me later on in life. A lot of the teachers that were there were complete, I don't know if I can say it here, um, they wouldn't be the type of people that I'd like to hang around with. A couple of them, if it was today, actually a lot of the staff, if it was today, would be in prison for what they did. Um, they were just absolutely brutal. Um, but it was allowed then. Staff were allowed to beat you. They encouraged the older boys to be very. So when you're 11 years old, to be smacked around by an 18-year-old, that was somewhat encouraged. They were allowed to basically run the show after the staff had gone to bed at night. So yeah, and so I think that's why I say I survived a British boarding school. Um, I don't know if it was a typical boarding school experience. A lot of people I know during my time there are some former groups of boys who went to this school, or men now, and there's a sharp difference between those that were there in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. A huge difference between that group and the group that came afterwards. So there's a lot of mixed. You don't find many people or many men now of my cohort who look back upon it too fondly. I have fond memories, some fond memories, some good memories, learned some great lessons, but overall, it was not something that I look back on as being the best time of my life. I know that there's some work being done, some studies being done on the damaging effect of sending young boys to a boarding school. Um, I don't know how. I don't know the psychology behind that. I just know from my own personal story that I did not have the best time. Um, and it was for the most part, it was, despite the fact that there were some good times. And I think no matter what you go through in life, there'll always be an aspect of it that you appreciated that there were times that you enjoyed, that you, no matter how bad a situation or a time is, you learn to make the most of it. You learn to extract some value from it. And that's really something I try to do even to, to today. In some future videos when I kind of discuss more of my journey, there were some other challenging periods of my life. I don't consider myself to be unique in any way. Everybody goes through tough times. But to have it happen at such a young age, without, and not the fault of most of my family. They were unaware. I didn't have contact with them. I was pretty much cut off from a lot of my family. So it was a lonely time. Would I recommend boarding school to a young boy today? It really depends on the boarding school. Yeah, I'm trying this new whiskey, Loch Lomond single malt. I'm really getting into the smoke. As one guy I watch a lot on YouTube calls them the peat monsters. Would I recommend boarding school to a young boy? Again, it depends on the school. That school I went to, 100% no, absolutely not. I don't think you can even really call it a boarding school. But yes, I think that especially today, young boys, young men need more formation, more structure is needed, discipline is needed, but within a context of shaping that young man to becoming a great man later in life. So I think I would recommend it, but again, obviously not like where I went. So that really was, I think, the start of part of the start of my journey to where I am today. That was a part of the journey of where I am today, and really what I hope is coming out in this channel, or what will come out in this channel, and really that paves the way to me talking more about the life I want to live today. It's taken a long time. It's taken a long time. It's taken me going through that, having the opportunity to live overseas, then having the opportunity to move to Canada, being married, being divorced, remarried, widowed, and now with an absolutely phenomenal partner. So it's been a lengthy journey, and it's been a challenging journey, but I think now I'm getting to the point, especially, I don't know what happened in my 50s, something clicked. Maybe I was later than most. Something clicked which said, you know what, I've worked hard my whole life, I've gone through a lot of crap in my life, and now is when I want to explore what truly interests me. And it might be selfish, but I think there's nothing wrong with being a little bit selfish when you've given an entire life, I think, to helping others, serving others, working hard, doing all the right things, that you get to a point in life where you say, you know what, now's some time for me. I think that we've often been told that we shouldn't do that. That's egotistical. That's, what do they say? What do people throw out now? Narcissistic? I don't know. But whatever it is, this is a time where I want to explore. I want to enjoy life, and I want to keep on this journey of exploration, of discovery, and share it with you. So I hope that you'll stick with me through this. I've got a lot of great videos coming up, a lot of things I'd like to talk about. If anybody did go to a boarding school and had a similar experience, a different experience, I'd really love to hear it. So drop me a comment below, share your thoughts, and if you haven't already, I again would truly appreciate you subscribing to this channel and liking this video if you did. If you didn't, then don't. Leave me a comment, tell me why you didn't like it. And I'm going to be getting ready for the next video. And until then, look after yourselves, be good, and I'll see you on the next one.